In ancient China, centuries before the rise of social media or even the printing press, people still wrestled with the same questions that shape our lives today. How do you get along with others? How do you balance closeness with independence? How do you maintain harmony in a family, a friendship, or a romance? Taoism, the philosophy of flow, offered one of history's most unusual answers. Instead of focusing on rules of etiquette or codes of loyalty, it suggested something far more fluid. Relationships should move like rivers, bending and yielding, rather than clashing like armies. The Tao Te Ching, the slim but endlessly quoted book attributed to the sage Laozi, opens with the reminder that the deepest truths cannot be pinned down. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. This principle applies to relationships too. You can talk endlessly about love, loyalty, or friendship, but the living experience resists neat definitions. Taoism teaches that trying to control people too tightly, or trying to force emotions into rigid categories, often leads to disappointment. Relationships, like the Tao, cannot be captured in words alone. They must be lived in flow. Historians still argue whether Taoism was originally meant as political advice for rulers, spiritual guidance for seekers, or everyday wisdom for ordinary people. But across interpretations, one idea recurs, that forcing relationships into fixed molds is like damming a river. It may hold for a time, but eventually the pressure breaks through. Ancient stories from Taoist folklore capture this insight. One tale describes an old farmer who refused to panic when his horse ran away. Neighbors called it bad luck, but he simply shrugged. Who knows what is good or bad? Days later, the horse returned, bringing others with it. The farmer's son tried to ride one, fell, and broke his leg. Bad luck again, the neighbors cried. Yet soon, when soldiers came to recruit able-bodied young men, the injured son was spared. What does this parable teach? That relationships, like fortune itself, cannot be judged in single moments. What seems a loss may turn to gain. For Taoism, the lesson is clear. When dealing with others, don't grip too tightly. Stay open, because the flow of events and of people always continues. If the Tao itself is the current of existence, then Wu Wei, often translated as effortless action, explains how human beings should move within that current. At first glance, it sounds like passivity, but it is not about doing nothing. It is about not forcing, not straining, and not fighting against the natural rhythm of things. In relationships, this principle has striking implications. Instead of pushing people to act as you want, Taoism suggests letting the bond develop with ease, as naturally as water flows downhill. The Tao Te Ching describes it in deceptively simple lines. The Tao never acts, yet through it all things are done. A friendship built on pressure and demands eventually buckles. A romance held too tightly suffocates. But when trust allows things to unfold in their own time, connections deepen in ways that cannot be engineered. Think of laughter that arises spontaneously with a close friend. It is not planned, it simply happens. That is Wu Wei at work. Classical Taoist stories reinforce the point. One tells of a butcher who explained that his knife never grew dull because he never forced it through bone. Instead, he allowed the blade to glide through the natural spaces in the joints. His mastery came not from strength, but from alignment with the natural structure before him. Taoist thinkers use this as a metaphor for living. When you stop forcing, life lasts longer, flows easier. In the context of relationships, the meaning is clear. Forcing creates friction, alignment creates harmony. Philosophers continue to debate whether Wu Wei is primarily political advice, urging rulers not to micromanage their people, or spiritual guidance, a way for seekers to live closer to the Tao. But on a personal level, the principle resonates across time. In friendships, it means listening more than insisting. In romantic love, it means letting affection breathe rather than controlling it. In family life, it means understanding that growth cannot be rushed, only supported. What emerges is not weakness, but strength of a different kind. Taoism insists that the strongest connections are those that flow naturally. When you stop pushing, the river of relationship often finds its own way. Taoism also teaches that relationships, like the universe itself, are sustained by balance. This idea is embodied in the famous symbol of yin and yang, the swirling circle of black and white that contains a seed of its opposite within each half. Yin is the dark, receptive, and yielding, Yang is the bright, active, and assertive. Rather than opposing each other, they complete one another. Taoist thinkers believe the healthiest lives and the healthiest relationships recognize this rhythm of opposites. In friendships and partnerships, balance matters. If one person dominates while the other always yields, harmony collapses. If both insist on pushing, conflict escalates. But when each allows space for the other, the relationship moves like the turning of the seasons, sometimes bright and full of energy, sometimes quiet and still, but always part of the same cycle. The lesson of yin and yang is that difference is not a threat, but a complement. Night requires day, listening requires speaking, independence requires closeness. The Tao Te Ching explains it with characteristic simplicity. Know the male, yet keep to the female. Be the valley of the world. The verse is not about gender roles in a narrow sense, but about learning to embody both sides of life, strength and gentleness, assertion and receptivity. In relationships, this means recognizing when to speak and when to listen, when to hold firm and when to let go. Scholars still debate whether Taoism was offering literal social advice or using metaphor to describe the cosmic order. Either way, its message endures. Balance sustains harmony. Accounts from early Taoist practice describe people seeking to align their bodies and spirits with yin and yang through breathing exercises, meditation, and diet. The idea was that imbalance created illness, while harmony restored health. Taoists extended this to social life. An unbalanced relationship creates tension, but a balanced one restores vitality. The principle still resonates today. Many modern people speak of give and take in relationships, but Taoism goes further. It teaches that both giving and receiving are aspects of the same whole, cycling into each other. Seen this way, relationships are not battles of wills but dances of balance, where difference becomes the condition for unity. If balance is one pillar of Taoist relationships, detachment is another. To modern ears, the word might sound cold, as if it meant not caring, but in Taoist thought, it means something subtler, the ability to accept change without clinging. All things, Taoism reminds us, are impermanent. Rivers shift course, trees shed leaves, friendships grow, fade, and sometimes return in new form. To resist this reality is to struggle against the current. To accept it is to flow with the Tao. The Tao Te Ching counsels, he who clings to things will suffer great loss. This is not cynicism, but recognition that holding too tightly to people, or to the way a relationship once was, often leads to suffering. A friendship may change because two people grow in different directions. A romance may end, not through betrayal, but through natural drift. Taoism advises against fighting such transitions with bitterness. Instead, it asks us to honor what was shared while allowing space for what will come next. When conflict arises, Taoist wisdom also leans toward softness. One verse declares, "The soft overcomes the hard, the weak overcomes the strong." Just as water wears down stone, gentle responses can dissolve hostility over time. In relationships, this means not meeting anger with more anger, but with patience and calm. Historians still debate whether these lines were intended primarily as political advice, urging rulers to avoid excessive force, or as personal guidance for daily life. Either way, the message resonates. Sometimes the most effective way to resolve conflict is not to fight harder, but to yield strategically. Accounts of Taoist sages often describe them withdrawing from heated disputes, not out of cowardice but out of wisdom. They saw that when tempers burn hottest, words only inflame further. By waiting, by stepping aside, they allowed space for harmony to return. Modern psychology might describe this as emotional regulation, but Taoism cast it in cosmic terms, aligning with the flow rather than damming it. Relationships shaped by detachment and softness do not mean apathy. They mean valuing people while accepting that change is inevitable and meeting conflict with patience rather than force. This approach, Taoism suggests, preserves harmony long after the storm passes. Over the centuries, Taoism spread far beyond the pages of the Tao Te Ching, weaving itself into art, medicine, politics, and everyday life. Yet at its heart, it always returned to the question of harmony, how humans can live in rhythm with the Tao and with one another. Relationships, whether between friends, lovers, parents and children, or even rulers and subjects, were seen not as fixed contracts but as living flows. Taoism reminded people that harmony is not built through force, but through alignment, balance, and acceptance of change. Scholars continue to debate whether Taoism is best read as a political philosophy, a religious tradition, or a guide to personal living. But when it comes to human relationships, its wisdom transcends categories. It urges us to see connection itself as a form of flow. People come together, drift apart, and sometimes reconnect by just as rivers split and merge again. Trying to lock someone into permanence is like trying to freeze a river in motion. It cannot be done without destroying its essence. In a modern world saturated with expectations, where relationships are constantly defined by labels, social media posts, and cultural scripts, Taoism offers a striking alternative. It invites us to loosen our grip. Instead of asking, "How do I control this relationship?" it asks, "How do I move in harmony with it?" Instead of treating change as failure, it treats it as the natural unfolding of the way. For young people especially, who often feel pressured to have friendships or romances conform to fixed patterns, Taoism can be liberating. It suggests that the healthiest connections are not forced into shape, but allowed to find their own form. And its insights about conflict, balance, and detachment remain timeless. Yin and Yang remind us that difference sustains harmony. Wu Wei reminds us that ease is more powerful than strain. The parable of water reminds us that softness, over time, overcomes hardness. These are not abstract metaphors but practical guides for how to listen, how to let go, how to remain steady when emotions surge. To live as a Taoist in relationships is not to withdraw from love or friendship. It is to engage fully but without clutching. It is to care deeply but without control. It is to move as water moves, nourishing, flexible, always flowing forward. In this way, Taoism's philosophy of flow continues to offer wisdom for one of the most enduring human challenges: how to live together in harmony.